Hey, today I thought I'd talk about the state of the musou genre. I think went through a lot last year, to put it nicely. They have been making some hints about some changes and stuff. I hope it's not something dumb like a musou battle royale or something. As awesome as that sounds, I don't really think it would particularly do very well. But I think there's a number of things that have made things get to the state they're in right now. Now, the first thing is the unrealistic expectations that the community has for these games. I can't really call people delusional. I think it's just people don't understand exactly how video game development works. It seems like people think that they can add a dozen characters per game. That always seems to be the biggest complaint with musou games, is that they don't have X character and Y character and so on and so forth. And the problem with that is that it makes it harder for them to make changes. That's why this game, as good as the combat is, the biggest problem is that a lot of the movesets are homogenized and the movesets are not very large. But when you have to change things for 94 characters, obviously it makes things a lot harder than they should be. Now, back when Dynasty Warriors 8 came out, keep in mind that was the first game to have everyone with a complete unique moveset. There were no clones in that game at all. One of the people who worked on it said, I don't remember if it was an interview or something, but they basically said like it was hard for them to come up with an aerial musou for everybody. And if you play that game, if you go back, or if you're just lazy and you just watch a musou compilation, there's plenty of those on YouTube, I'm sure, you'll see it's pretty common. A lot of them are just ground pounds and stuff like that. And the reason for that is because they had to come up with like 84 of them. I think people need to temper their expectations and realize that these unrealistic expectations have caused all these problems to begin with. I want to play Sim for a little bit. I also feel that in general, like one of the problems with the musou games, Swillow was the one to point this out in his Discord. Apparently they don't have like a consistent director for any of these games. Basically it's like a different person almost every time. I think like maybe the Samurai Warriors director, I think he works on the majority of them, but in terms of like the spin-offs and the Dynasty Warriors games, it's been all over the place. And once I found that out, it actually explains a lot in terms of how the quality can be very inconsistent between these games, even though they're all from the same development studio. I think the biggest problem with musou games in general is that we always make like great strides in these games, and then things get set back drastically. For a lot of people with this game, it's mostly just the lack of the unique movesets. So that personally doesn't bother me that much. I know that they will fix it in due time. I think that the last season pass that they added just last month was actually pretty good. Those weapons had at least some gimmicks. The Snake Spear in particular didn't really have anything special about it, but at the same time, it was fun to use. The other weapons actually had the unique mechanics as well. I think that's definitely what's missing. And for what it's worth, I think people worship the fact that Dynasty Warriors 8 had a complete unique moveset cast, or movesets for the entire roster. A lot of them are very bad. There are a lot of characters in this game, many characters actually, that are actually a lot better off for being clones. And when I went back and played Warriors Orochi 4, obviously I had not played Dynasty Warriors 8 for quite some time. The last time I played it was maybe like 4 years ago when I got the Vita version. A lot of those movesets are pretty bad, and you go back to Orochi 4 and you realize a lot of them aren't really any better just because they have their unique moveset. They're actually sometimes even at a disadvantage. It seems like the community in general, they want quantity over quality. And, I played Fire Emblem Musou, and keep in mind, I am not, like, a Fire Emblem fan at all. I've never played any of them. The only knowledge I have of it was what little I played of Smash Bros. Melee, and I used to go to a friend's house, and he used to play the Game Boy one on his emulator, and I thought the pixel art and the animations were cool, but like, no other experience with it at all. I actually enjoyed that game for what it's worth, because it actually had, pretty unique combat. The combat was good. Most of the movesets in the game were actually very solid. Like, obviously that game had a lot of clones. I don't really agree with the fact that they're charging for DLC clones. I do think that's incredibly shady. But the moveset quality of the moves or the characters that were in the game originally were actually pretty good. I think there were like 3 or 4 of the the clones or the DLC pack that weren't clones, their movesets are pretty good as well. But the clones didn't really bother me because the overall moveset quality was actually quite good. It happens a lot in like the you know, the franchise Musou games, the spin-offs and stuff. You know, people complain that they only have like 20 characters or something, but what ends up happening is that all that stuff's made from scratch since they can't really recycle anything from the mainline games. So it actually ends up being like more original content that way. That's also another problem as well with the franchise Musou games. Since they have to make everything from scratch, they can actually experiment a lot more with the mechanics and advancing the genre. Whereas with games like this, it's a massive undertaking to change even a minor thing. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it was a big deal for them to just add an aerial Musou. You know, in any other like fighting game or something, that would not really be a big deal. And there's plenty of games like Street Fighter 4 and King of Fighters and stuff that have iterated on old sprites and movesets for a long time. Tekken especially. But here, it's such a just big deal for them to do that. Whereas with the franchise games, they can pretty much do whatever they want. I thought One Piece Pirate Warriors 3 was actually a really good game. And once again, I'm not a One Piece fan at all. I've never watched a single episode. I enjoyed that game enough to finish the story. I did a little bit of the post-game and stuff. And the overall moveset quality in that game was actually quite good. The gameplay has some nice advances as well. Things like universal dodge canceling and dodge offsetting, some of which is actually in this game. But, you know, I can't really say that it's the Musou community's fault. A lot of games like that now, even the marketing for these modern video games and stuff, a lot of it is just focused on numbers. You know, they can say that an open world has, you know, 500 million square miles or something, but all of it is full of nothing. Kind of like this game. You know, the open world, as much as people complain about things that don't always make sense with this game, it's definitely one of the most valid complaints is that there's not really a whole lot to do in it. And also, the power creep has definitely kind of dampened the overall quality or purpose of the open world. But still, even in other games, you know, you see like big, like AAA Western games and stuff, you know, they'll always talk about numbers. You know, the game has this many maps or this big of an open world and stuff, and sometimes less is more. I wish people would realize that, especially in the Musou community. You know, sometimes you can have something have less content and it could actually give you more in the long run. Like a lot of modern beat-em-ups, for example, you know, beat-em-ups and Musou games are pretty closely knit in my opinion. These are basically modern beat-em-ups just with more RPG elements and more replay value overall. A lot of the ones made by indie developers, for example, like they'll have like hour-long or 2-hour, sometimes even longer than that, like 4 or 5 hour-long campaigns. And that makes the fatigue set in really quickly, unless there's some kind of like persistent element or RPG elements in the game to kind of, you know, enhance the moveset and add more gameplay variety. There's no reason for the game to be that long. Like, at least for me, you know, when I see those beat-em-ups that are like 6 hours long and they have like small movesets and stuff, it just makes me wonder why the game isn't like 45 minutes long. I would actually play it a lot more if it had, you know, less overall gameplay length, maybe more gameplay depth, and you know, a short enough campaign that I could actually finish it and want to play it more than once. Same could be applied to the Musou games, you know, if they had like less characters, or maybe they pulled like a Basara 3 and kind of like cut a lot of the characters out, and then did a massive overhaul like this, and then bring them back in later. I think that would have been ideal, but the community in general just seems to be completely obsessed with they want all the characters in all the time. And I do agree that sometimes the character cuts are a little odd. You know, they introduced Pang Day in Dynasty Warriors 5, and then they cut him out in the next game. It kind of questions why he was in the game at all. But still, I think a roster cut would be a great, be a lesser of two evils in my opinion. I know a lot of people won't agree with me, but I think it would do a lot for this this series at this point. But like I said, I think a lot of this, the the marketing we get for video games now is it's too focused on numbers instead of the quality of the content that's actually in it. You know, Assault Spy, as much as I love that game, I like it because it's a short game and it respects your time. A lot of games these days don't respect your time. This game in particular only expects your time if you don't play as all the characters and you don't bother with the clones. Luckily, there are a lot of clones that are pretty bad. Usually there's like maybe one character, one officer out of that particular weapon family that actually has something useful that's actually worth using. But this game has 94 story modes, and I think that's part of what kind of caused all the problems this game has as well. Like the more I play this, you know, I just like playing through the story mode because I can go through it in like an hour or two. It's kind of like you know, some of those shorter beat-em-ups that I've mentioned in the past. But there's no real reason for there to be 94 story modes. They could easily just have the Kingdom story modes, and that would reduce a lot of the repetition. I honestly feel that the developers of this game probably feel the same way, because in the past few patches they basically made it so you don't really have to bother with every story mode. You can actually just switch characters on the last of their chapter and just go straight to the end and see the endings that way. It makes me question why they didn't design the game that way in the first place. But again, I think it's due to the unrealistic expectations that the fans set. And I can understand the passion. You know, I think that a lot of people realize, or don't realize, that when people like me, when we criticize these games, it's all out of passion. And I think it's important for people to have sorry, I can't talk. To be able to have like constructive criticism towards things that they like. I think that's the only way these games get better. It's just the problem with musou games in general is that there's never like a clear improvement. Like, I think the combat in this game is really great, but a lot of the, even like not considering the clones, a lot of the unique elements of these weapons is basically gone. They did not really carry over the gimmick system from 7 and 8. But again, I think it's like just basically less is more sometimes. You could have like 30 characters and have like much larger, more robust movesets than what's in this game. I think it would have turned out a lot better. I know if they had maybe not committed to having like the whole continent of China in the game, you know, they just cut it down a bit, maybe not have a lot of that stuff in there. I think that maybe how barren the open world is would not have been as big of an issue. I do think this game actually does a pretty good job of making it so you don't even really have to interact with the open world past a certain point. I'd say if you finish like a long campaign like Xiao Yun or Cheng Pu or Shuran, one of those characters, like you don't really even have to interact with it anymore. I can tell you right now, if I still had to interact with the open world, I would not still be playing this game. I do like that part, but I do think it was also kind of a side effect of the way that video game marketing works now, where everything has to be this big, you know, epic masterpiece and stuff like that. And it's like, sometimes, you know, you can just have short experiences and they can do well. You know, there are some indie games out there that are very small, don't have the best graphics, don't really try to be anything that they're not, and they do pretty well. I think, you know, as the gaming demographic, at least for games like this, as it ages, I think maybe people will start to see the light and maybe not want such massive games all the time. Now, you know, I work from home. I am on disability, so, you know, I have more free time than most people my age, but even then, you know, I don't always want to commit to 80-hour games all the time. Sometimes it's very common to see, you know, all a game has to offer in terms of the gameplay in the first couple hours, and at that point, you know, you wonder if it's even worth the time investment to continue. I think that the developers of these games work really hard. It's just that they have such a massive amount of work to do, and it's hard to like actually make any consistent changes. However, I do feel that the fact that they don't have like consistent, you know, directors behind these games, and also they seem to put a lot more effort into the the franchise musou games, because obviously they're dealing with someone else's IP. I think that's a little unfair, honestly. You know, these are the games that started it all. They would not have all those opportunities. Stuff like Hyrule Warriors, Fire Emblem Warriors, One Piece, Berserk, and so on. You know, if these games didn't exist. I just want them to give more care to their actual IPs. You know, for what it's worth, I thought Samurai Warriors 4 was a pretty boring game in general because, you know, they were so committed to having everybody in the game, and, you know, the movesets didn't really change that much. The mechanics that they did add were kind of a band-aid fix, but at the same time, they didn't really do much. You can tell with this game they wanted to make a big change, but I question how much of it they actually wanted to make. What I think that what happened is that, you know, they had suits, you know, with a gun to their heads, basically shoving it down their throat that they need to make a massive change, and I think that they tried to change too many things. I think it's good that they're trying to change things, it's just that a lot of people don't realize these games don't have massive budgets, and they also don't have AAA development times. I think this game was only in development for like 2.5 or 3 years, which for a game of this size, you know, yes, despite the massive open world and all the clones and stuff, that's still not that much time. Most big open world games take like a lot longer. You know, the Rockstar games take a lot longer. Anyway, that's basically all I really have to say. I just thought I'd try to open some eyes here. I think that the community in general has indirectly, or actually directly, caused a lot of the problems that these games have now, as people just have all these demands and they want all these characters in the games and stuff, and I think that it puts the developers between a rock and a hard place. Like, they want to make changes. This game definitely made some great changes in terms of the combat system and some other elements of it as well, but it's just too much to change, you know. Even right now, you know, they even said that adding new moves is off the table right now because of all the massive workload it would entail. And also, they're kind of in a situation right now where they could add a new move for everybody, but a little under half the cast now is still cloned. You know, we're getting another 3 weapons sometime later this month, so, you know, that will help quite a bit, but there's still going to be like 30 to 35 clones in the game, so it's like, you know, they could add a new move now, but, you know, they would just have to make another one later. I think that definitely goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. You know, there's been so many demands for characters that honestly don't do much of anything. You know, they don't really serve much purpose. They're just kind of there, and the fact that they are there, despite that there are many fans for them, makes it harder for them to make any significant changes. So hopefully, you know, maybe in the next few months they will improve this. They did say that they have some kind of big announcement for the Dynasty Warriors series. I don't know what that could be. I assume if it's a big announcement, it's probably not just going to be like an incremental update to this or something, or an expansion or something. I'm curious to see what it'll be, but I hope people will realize, you know, whatever that game is, or add-on or whatever, that, you know, if it's not perfect, these guys are trying hard. They're working their asses off. It's just, there's too much to do at one time. And, you know, they're working with a massive legacy of characters, and it's just really difficult for them to make any significant changes. So, if you play these games and you complain about them, if you don't like the rosters and stuff like that, you have to remember how much they have to change at once. There's not really any other, like, video game franchise right now that has literally every character intact. Even, you know, games like Street Fighter V and Tekken, those are the latest installments of those games. KOF 14, you know, that game has 50 characters, but it's still missing a lot of legacy characters and things like that. This game has everybody they've ever had, and it's kind of a miracle that they were able to improve the combat as much as they did. But I think people need to realize that sometimes less is more. You know, quality is better than quantity, and we definitely kind of see that reflected in the quality of the franchise musou games. So hopefully some of that will come over here. I hope that the company will actually listen to the worthwhile feedback. I know they're getting a lot of negative feedback towards this game that doesn't make any sense. I hope they'll listen to the constructive and intelligent feedback and try to improve this. I'm definitely excited to see where this game will go. I want to see the future of musou games to improve. Right now, it's definitely struggling. I think 2018 was definitely a pretty rough year for the musou community in general. You know, this game was disappointing and very polarizing. It definitely didn't launch in the best state. I think it's in a better state right now, but it's very similar to what's gone on with No Man's Sky. You know, apparently they've improved that game a lot, but you don't hear people talk about it anymore because, you know, it's not really in the public eye anymore. And that's kind of the problem with this game, and just the problem with games right now in general. There's just a sensory overload of games, and you can't really expect people to come back and check in on things as often as they'd like. I don't really know what else to say. I just wanted to say that I think it's good that the musou community got through last year, but I think a lot of changes need to be made in the way that we perceive these games and the way that we give feedback and things like that. There's a lot to work on in this game, but I think we as a community need to work together as well and stop being, just asking for things that don't make sense. Realize that the developers are in a rock and a hard place, and we've been through times like this before. Dynasty Warriors 6 in particular. Some people didn't like Dynasty Warriors 7. Samurai Warriors 4 was disappointing for a lot of people. Basara 3, I remember the whole drama around that, not having all those characters in the game, but it actually ended up being a good thing. It was a lesser of two evils because they had less work to do and they completely overhauled the combat. Like Basara 1 to 2 and from 3 to 4 and Sumeragi and Yuki Muraden, those are like completely different games, and that was because they made the difficult decision to cut out a bunch of characters early on, do a massive overhaul, and then add them back in when they have the new mechanics solidified. I think that definitely would have helped this game quite a bit, but it's too late for that now. I hope that the next movesets and the updates and whatever they have in the future will definitely be better overall. Anyway, that's it. I just thought I'd talk about the state of the musou community and genre. I've been playing these games for almost 20 years. I'm very passionate about them. I know I can seem like I'm hard on them, but it's all out of passion. I just want these games to be better, and I just want people to kind of temper their expectations a little bit. I think that people think that these games have like $500 million budgets. It's probably like a tenth of that or even less. I think that they do a great job with what they have to work with. However, it's just too much for a small team. Catch you guys later. Peace.